For the next 11 blocks in my 365 challenge quilt, I'm going to be using my 1918 Singer 24-61 chain stitcher. A chain stitcher's real different than a lock stitch. This little one happens to be a hand crank. They do come in treadle models and motorized models as well. And this one has a black cloth plate with decals on it, which is pretty rare in the, most of them you'll see with silver cloth plates, silver plated, nickel plated. And it has these nice little floral decals with berries, which you often see in some of the more decorative models of the 24, the older models. This is the back side of it. Now these came with a lot of variations in the designs of how they're threaded and speeds that they can do. There were domestic models and also industrial models, some very high-speed industrials. So they can look really different and thread somewhat differently. Spool pins were in different locations sometimes, or even non-existent in the industrials. The hand crank on this folds up nice so it fits in the case. It's a real solid, really nicely made hand crank. Quiet. And this is what it looks like underneath these machines. A little chain stitcher does not have a bobbin. It only has the top thread. And this little looper hook here going around is what forms the little chain underneath. So on top it looks like a normal straight stitch, and underneath you've got these little loops, which I'll show you here. Very quiet machine. I call them the whisperers machines. Here I'm going to show you how to thread this particular one. And again, because of all the variations in the 24s, your machine, if you have one, may not be like this. They thread differently. They've got their spool pins in different locations. This one has a little spool holder up there at the front of the head. And I use these little nets, these little thread spool nets, to feed more evenly with these, because I've found that they're a little fussy about the tension on them. From one thread to the next, they can need some different kinds of tension on them to be a really nice smooth loop. And here normally, for this particular model, this is how you would thread the back side, going up around this stationary tensioner there in the middle, and then coming around to the automatic tensioner, which lifts up and down while you sew and puts tension on the thread. But you never adjust those. I've found I've had to adjust it with my other ways, with the little thread spool nets and such. Here you go on the front end, you'll go through these little guides. There's this little spring down there. It's primarily designed for an embroidery type stitch. It gives you a bigger loop. But I found, again, depending on the thread I'm using, weight of the thread, what it's made of, I might use that just to get the kind of loop on the underside that I want. So here I'm going to go ahead and thread it through that little embroidery spring, then up under the normal little eye guide, then up over the little take-up bar here after there. And it pops in between a little spring area, and then down through the eye along the face of the machine. And then these thread from left to right for your needle. So here we'll sew with it a little bit, and you can hear these, how quiet these are. They just whisper. They're the quietest machines you can use. I don't think there's anything that's as quiet as a chain stitch. You don't have that rattling bobbin case. And here on the back you can see the nice little chain, the little loops that form the chain underneath. I've got two colors there, the white and the blue. And here's another reason it's a chain stitch. It'll zip completely off if you don't end the stitches or cross over the stitches with seams to hold them tight. They can unzip, so you have to know how to end your stitch line. And I'll show you that in a minute here. We'll go ahead and do a little bit length of sewing. And what you have to do, you'll end it. You'll pull a little length of thread out so you have something to snip right, and then you'll pull it out from under the needle, snip it close down to the cloth, and you'll see that little tail pop down underneath the cloth. So the end of that thread is on the underside now, and as I pull on it, it's locked. So you can either take a needle and thread that back through and make it more secure, or sew over it with another seam, and that'll usually hold these chain stitch seams really well. And here I'm starting on a little block for the project. And again, I've got from one end to another, so I'm going to pull a little length of thread out to end the seam line. I'm going to come under the needle, pull it out, and snip down close to the foot or to the cloth, and then it's locked. It won't unzip. And I will be putting seams over the top of this as well, so they will lock down real well. And you can also chain piece with these. You just have to be careful because you won't be locking your seams between the pieces, and if you're going to sew over with another seam, they'll hold just fine. But you do have to be careful to not pull on the ends of these seams when you're using a chain stitcher. So here I've got one through, and I'm going to pull now another one through. Sew another one through. And they'll do just fine. I made a whole quilt, a queen size quilt, and all of the piecing and quilting were done on my Wilcox and Gibbs chain stitcher, and that was many years ago now, and it's held up just perfectly. So here I'm finishing up this little block, and I was real pleased with how the little Singer 24 chain stitcher did for this block, but I needed to adjust my seams a little more. I've got my scant 1/4 inch is always kind of a trial and error here, and I was a little off on that, so I've got some edges that weren't quite out there, but should work fine.